Okay, Algebra 2 class, Mod 8. It is Wednesday, April 8th, 2020. We've done a lot of work with rational expressions and functions. We've graphed them, we've simplified them, we've multiplied them, divided them, added them, subtracted them, and finally, the last thing we've got to do with rational expressions is solve what's called rational equations. So for today's topic, date, top left corner, 4/8/20, April 8th, 2020. The title, Solving Rational Equations. And again, 4 parts, divide up your paper. We're going to attack one rational equation in each block. I'm going to teach you a technique for solving these. And then you can try 4 of these to see if you understand what I just taught you, okay? All right, now I know they look a little scary. Your job, go to block number 1, is to solve the following equation. 3/5 x minus 3 over 2 equals 11 over 4. Okay, now, like any equation, our job is to try to figure out the value of that missing x. So in other words, 3/5 times what missing number? If I times together and subtracted 3/2 from that, I'm supposed to end up with 11/4. So what would the missing number be? Now, obviously, your goal is normally what? Take x, wherever your x is at, and get that x to be all by itself. Well, if I said, what do you notice? If you were playing a detective and you looked at that problem and the second one and the third one and the fourth one and said, what do they all have in common? Obviously, all these equations have fractions in them. Agreed? Well, there's a trick for solving an equation that has fractions in it. Wouldn't you love to get rid of all the denominators in this problem? It'd be great if none of them were here. In other words, if I covered them all up and that just would have said 3x minus 3 equals 11, you guys would love that equation. It'd be really easy to solve. So my goal is to make it look like that by making the denominators disappear. Now, how's that going to happen? All right, make a little note here. Everybody write the letters LCD, least common denominator. I've got to look at this equation with fractions in it, and find the least common denominator as if I was getting a common denominator back in 6th and 7th grade math. Now, what do I mean by that? Okay, listen real careful here. You look at each denominator. I've got a 5 and a 2 and a 4. I got to think of some number that I could turn all 3 of those into. In other words, what number would 5, 2, and 4 all divide into evenly? Would you agree that that least common denominator, wouldn't it be 20? Think about it. 5 goes into the number 20, 2 goes into the number 20, and 4 also goes into the number 20. So since 5 and 2 and 4 all go into the number 20, 20 is our least common denominator. So all you've got to do is take each numerator and multiply them by whatever number you would need to turn the bottom into a 20. Let me translate that into English. Okay, here we go. Everybody agrees this first denominator is a 5. Okay, simple question. What would I multiply by 5 to turn it into a 20? Well, of course, you would say 4, right? Isn't 5 times 4 going to give me 20? So you take the numerator, in this case, the 3 and the x, in other words, everything except the denominator, and times it by 4. And that would give me 12x. Minus, now go to the second fraction. The denominator there is a 2, isn't it? 2 times what would give you 20? Wouldn't it be 10? So take the top number and times it by 10. So that's going to give me minus 30. And finally, the last fraction has a 4 on bottom. Again, my least common denominator is 20, isn't it? 4 times what would give me 20? Well, wouldn't it be 4 times 5? So if you take that top number 11 and times it by 5, we would get 55. And oh my gosh, I did it. I turned that ugly equation with fractions in it and made it look like a nice normal equation. Now, you'll get weird answers on most of these, because think about it. If the original equation had a bunch of fractions in it, you're probably going to end up with an answer that's a fraction of some kind. So now I add over the 30. 30s are gone. 12x equals, what is that, 85? Divide by 12. And guys, you don't need a calculator. You can just leave it in fraction form. 85 twelfths, I don't think even reduces. We just leave our answer. Who would have thought that the missing number in that equation was 85 twelfths? Okay, now I know that seems like a lot, but once you get the hang of it, it's a lot easier than you think. Let me prove it to you. Go to block 2. Write down 1/2 x minus 5/3 equals negative 1/2 x plus 19/4. Here's all you got to do. You ready? Think with me. Don't just copy. Ready? Look at your bottom numbers. I have a 2 and a 3 and a 2 and a 4. I need an LCD, don't I? A least common denominator. 2, 3, 2, and 4 all could get turned into what number? They all go into what number? Wouldn't it be 12? Think about it. 2, if I times them by 6, would turn into 12. 3, if I times them by 4, would turn into a 12. 2, if I times them by 6, would turn into 12. And 4, if I times them by 3, would again turn into a 12. So my least common denominator is going to be 12. So with that being the case, ready? If I have bottom number here is 2, 2 times what? 6 would give me 12. So I take the top, which is 1x, and I times it by 6, and I get 6x. Minus, now this bottom number is 3, isn't it? What would I take 3 and times him by to turn him into a 12? I would times him by 4, making that a 20. On this side, again, I have a bottom number of 2. To turn 2 into a 12, I'm going to times him by 6. So negative 1x times 6 is negative 6x. Plus, finally, this denominator is a 4. Wouldn't I multiply him by 3 to turn him into a 12? So I'm going to take the top number and times it by 3. 19 times 3 would be 57. So by deciding on your least common denominator, and by deciding what to multiply each fraction by, you end up canceling and getting rid of all the denominators. They disappear automatically, and I get an equation that looks like an Algebra 1 problem. So do you agree at this point I would add over the 6x? Those cancel. I've got 12x minus 20 equals 57. Add over the 20. I've got 12x equals 77. Divide by 12. And once again, weird answers, a fractional value of 77 twelfths. Okay? Go to block 3. It says 1 over x plus 1/2 equals 2 over x. Now careful. Notice instead of all numbers across the bottom, like the 2 that we just did, if I said name everything that you see in the denominator of these fractions, I certainly see a 2, and I also see a x. Agreed? So guys, when I say what's the least common denominator, isn't the least common denominator 2x? Oh, there's a 2 on the bottom, and there's an x also on the bottom. So on the bottom of all those fractions, I see a 2 and an x. So my least common denominator is 2x. Do not make this difficult. So obviously I'm going to multiply this guy by 2, right? Because he already had an x on bottom, and I'm trying to turn him into a 2x because that's my least common denominator. So all I had to do is multiply him by 2. Well, 2 times 1 gives me 2. Plus, this denominator has a 2 on the bottom, doesn't it? I want to turn it into a 2x. So what do I got to times him by? Just an x. I'd multiply the top by x. 1 times x is just x. Finally, on that side, what is your current denominator? It's an x, isn't it? I want to turn it into my LCD of 2x. So wouldn't I have to multiply that by 2? So I take the top and I times it by 2. 2 times 2 gives me 4. And lo and behold, to get this x all by itself, I subtract over the 2. And x equals 2. And I did it. Okay, not bad. Finally, let's try the last problem. 9 over 6x minus 3/4 equals 1/3 plus 5 over 4x. Now careful, if I said, let's kind of inspect or take a look at our denominators, I've got a 6x, a 4, a 3, and a 4x. Now, let's ignore the x's for a second. Pretend they're not there, giving me a 6, a 4, a 3, and a 4. I'll give you a second here to think about this. What number would be your least common denominator? 6 and 4 and 3 and 4. If you had to get a common denominator amongst those 4 numbers, what one number could you turn them all into? Wouldn't it be 12? 6 goes into 12, 4 goes into 12, 3 goes into 12, and 4 goes into 12. So my LCD, my least common denominator, is going to be 12. And then, of course, what letter do you see down there? X. I need to turn him into a 12x. I need to turn him into a 12x. I got to turn that denominator into a 12x. And that one into a 12x as well. So here we go. If this is currently a 6x, what would you multiply it by to turn it into a 12x? Wouldn't you have to multiply it by 2? So take the top number and times it by 2, giving me 18. Minus, now careful, this is a 4. I want to turn it into a 12x, don't I? So I would have to multiply it by what? 3x. So the minus sign I already took care of. 3 times 3x is 9x. On the other side, if this is a 3, and I'm trying to turn it into a 12x, I'd have to multiply it by what? 4x, agreed? 1 times 4x is 4x. Plus finally, this has already got a 4 and an x. I want to turn it into a 12x. So do we agree I'd have to multiply it by just 3? So timesing the top number by 3, I get 15. So guys, if you attack these problems correctly, you should end up in your first step down here with a nice normal looking equation that no longer has any fractions. Now obviously here, since there's an x on the left and an x on the right, I'm going to add over my 9x. Those would cancel. So I've got 18 equals, what is that, 13x plus 15. My goal is to get that x by itself, so of course I subtract 15. 15's cancel. I have 3 equals 13x. Divide by 13. And x equals, and again, you would just leave it as a fraction, 3/13. And I'm done. Okay, so these are called rational equations. Your goal is to make all the denominators disappear, turning into a normal equation. You solve it. Chances are you're going to get a fraction for an answer since there's so many fractions in the original equation. Okay, give it a shot. Guys, your job is to try 4 problems on your own. Do the best you can. You get a point just for trying each one. You get a point total just for using a correct process, and a point for each answer. You're to do this on your own. Do the best you can. If you get stuck or have a question, look at your notes or even watch part of the video again. Every homework problem mimics the 4 that I just did. So if you're having trouble on a particular problem in your homework, just go back to the video and watch that problem get done again. And if you follow along and focus on the steps, you can watch me do the problem again, and hopefully that clears things up, and then you can give your assignment another shot. All right, your 4 problems are as follows. I'll leave this up here. You can hit pause and copy these 4 down. There they are, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Very similar. They mimic the 4 that I just did. Your goal is to get a least common denominator, change each fractional equation into a normal equation, and solve from there. Not easy, something that's new, but at the same time, if you just take your time and focus, I think you'll be okay. Again, today is Wednesday, April 8th, so this is due tomorrow, Thursday, April 9th by noon. Tomorrow will be our last day together this week because remember, Friday is Good Friday. It's Easter weekend. We have no school on Friday. So tomorrow will be another section of rational equations similar to the ones we just did, but a different little twist because you'll have binomials on the bottom instead of monomials. Okay? We'll see you then. Bye.